360, and his name is Jason Killmeyer. He's on the line with us here this morning. Our conversation brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. And we're going to talk with Jason about holiday shopping, how it's going this year, what some of the trends are, and what some of the difficulties that people are encountering are. And Jason, good morning to you.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Jason is a supply chain and national security analyst. And I guess that word supply chain, or that phrase supply chain, Jason, is something we haven't been all that used to hearing until this year, huh?
Yeah, and it's funny because you think about the rise of an Amazon, right? And you think about these companies, FedEx, DHL, that have become household names. Well, how did they do that? It was because they were able to differentiate themselves in their supply chain and in their logistics. But it's just not something we tend to pay attention to. Unfortunately, now we all have to pay attention.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And so let's talk about those supply chain issues. We hear about cargo ships that get jammed into canals and things backing up. We hear about ships that are anchored offshore and just stacked up waiting for people to be able to unload them. Truckers who there aren't enough trucks to get the stuff off the ships. There's a lot that goes into the whole supply chain issue, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I like the example that you used, right, which is those ships that are sitting out there, because it's just a very literal manifestation of the issues we're having. So there are longshoremen, let's say at the port of Long Beach out in California. There are longshoremen waiting to unload those ships. But the companies aren't necessarily going to send the work order through because they can't hire a trucker to take it to the short-term warehouse. And the short-term warehouse is at 99.8% capacity and isn't sure if they can store the goods there to be put on rail and taken to the United States. And so, that word chain and supply chain, we really see how that manifests. Unfortunately, like what I'm looking at, we all know that the Consumer Price Index on Friday came out the highest in 39 years. I look at a few other pieces of data to try to predict out. I'm looking at the Logistics Managers Index, just came out last week. These guys foresee another 11 to 12 months of these types of price increases caused by supply chain issues.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So those guys, they're in the business of analyzing things, making predictions. Did they predict this?
No, and I think part of that surprise that we're seeing is we had, obviously COVID happened and we sort of had this disruption, but I think there are longer term trends that are starting to play into it. So we had a lot of people left the workforce. We have a range of government subsidies that have kept people out of the workforce probably longer than they should have. I think there was an overcorrection there. But the labor force participation rate, a lot of people don't think about this, has never recovered from the 2008 financial crisis. So we have a smaller pool of people from whom to, coax back into the workforce. But these guys look at transportation, warehousing, inventories, and we're seeing contractions at the exact same time that we need to see growth. And again, the output of that is higher prices for the average consumer. Those who can afford it the least are the people being hit the hardest.
Jason is the program manager for a federal supply chain risk management program. I know it's not an easy fix. Is there a fix out there right now that we can grasp onto and sort of hold out hope for?
There's no silver bullet, but what I tell people is, and again, you said this right at the beginning of our call, which I really appreciated, which is people are not super jazzed to want to talk about supply chain all the time, right? It is not something that we were used to. We were used to, you hit the button, the thing shows up. But there are specific elements of regulatory relief, waivers, and other actions that are actually appropriately within the purview of our federal government that they could take. None of them are perfect solutions. Let's say that you loosened the amount of hours that truckers could work, commercial truckers. Now, we want those guys to be safe. We don't want them to be overnight on the road tired. But those guys in those short-haul trucking situations, they're idling for hours, waiting for their pickup. So we could extend that, and there are a number of other just very basic fixes like that. We could put them in place just between now and December 26th, or maybe New Year's Day, and start to build relief that lets these supply chain bottlenecks work themselves out of the system.
Yeah, it's interesting you put it that way. Start to bring relief. I don't think anybody right now could handle a flood of products hitting the market, right? Because
exactly.
it would be really, really difficult in terms of distribution, getting them on the store shelves, getting the number of people in line to offer those for sale. And as hard as that is, what is the way? What are the one or two things that are going to start that flow again through that bottleneck?
Yeah. So what we're seeing right now is the market is making adjustments. So what I've been sort of very publicly advocating is that the federal government could ease some of these things via regulatory relief in the short term. What we're also seeing, though, is businesses adjust. Let me give you an example. The Gap, right, major retailer, big holiday season, they started to charter their own planes, and they've started to make their way around where these bottlenecks exist. Unfortunately, what does that mean for the consumer? It's increased prices. Mm-hmm. And so this is not the news I like to deliver, but what I tell people is the market will adjust. The logistics firms will add capacity. We will start to see our way out of this crisis. This is America. We have agency, right? We are exceptionally productive people. But all of these mitigations that we can take in the next 3 to 6 months add cost at the end point. And so for small businesses, for consumers, you're going to continue to feel that pain. Let me make one final point here about what we can do.
Okay.
We need to start to think about where we want to produce things. China is doubling down on its zero COVID policy. It has energy shortages and a lot of other things that are making it harder for us to predict what the manufacturing situation will be like in a place like southeastern China or Malaysia or Bangladesh. And so what we're going to have to do back here in Pennsylvania and in America is say, where do we want to start to build some things, not everything, but some things closer in so that we can have predictability, and predictability is good for businesses, and ultimately it's good for the consumer.
You know, just a second left this morning with Jason Killmeyer. You said something really interesting to me there, and that is that if the advantage in buying goods from overseas is that it's cheaper to produce, cheaper to ship it here, and ultimately cheaper for us to buy. Does that even out a bit if we start manufacturing here and alleviate some of those problems?
Yeah, it's really that math is really starting to look more attractive. I'll give you an example. China just delisted a major firm named Didi from the New York Stock Exchange because they wouldn't submit to basic audit requirements. That's going to be coming much more significantly in the next couple of years. And so that math of, hey, if we build it back here, if we build it closer to home, it allows us it's not only maybe a similar price point, but it just allows you a predictability and a stability. I think we're going to see a lot of U.S. manufacturers start to make that calculation. I think the consumers will as well.
Jason, what are some of the resources available for us to track what you do and how this is all going to play out?
Oh, yeah. Folks can just follow me. I'm at Jason Killmeyer on Twitter, based out of Pittsburgh. What I tell people to do is look at the Logistic Managers Index and then read different publications that are financial publications to look specifically for what you're seeing in the countries where we buy most of our goods. The reason I say that, let me give an example. There's a big spring holiday in China, and they're expecting that to be bigger this year. People didn't travel last year for COVID. They're, again, having certain employment issues as well. Well, if I know that that's going to be an issue there, and that's going to cause a little bit of a labor shortage in China, what does that mean for the American consumer? Well, about a month or 2 months later, that could lead to a spike in prices. That could lead to a slowdown in delivery.
Mm. Jason Killmeyer, what a puzzle it is. I appreciate your time here this morning. You've been eye-opening for us.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you're asking the right questions. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
You too.
It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, 101.1 FM and AM 1160. Fox News is next at the top of the hour, and then it is the Brian Kilmeade Show here on WCCS.